Good morning or afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Metrics Data 360 special webinar this month. We're happy to have our partners Rencore and Source Code Control join us as we talk about challenges and optimization opportunities for Microsoft 365. So first off, Metrics Data 360 is an organization that does cost optimization and governance, especially around anything software asset license, software asset management, and cost optimization. For those of you that don't know us, we've got our partner Source Code Control here, and our partner Rencore. And Rencore is a technology that actually helps with the governance around M365, and Source Code Control is our partner that actually can help implement Rencore as a technology and manage that for organizations. And the reason that we chose to have this topic today is as we work with our clients and organizations and we find opportunities for them to cost optimize Microsoft 365, we hear a number of the reasons why people aren't actually able to implement those challenges or those changes and realize the savings and things that are there for them. And we'll talk about that here in a second. But Rencore actually has a solution that can help with that. And governance and the ability to do these things is really one of the key things, because one of the biggest issues people say is they just don't have the time and or resources to actually implement the changes that we find. And so we're going to talk a little bit about what we see from a cost and license optimization perspective. And then I'm going to turn over to Sam, who's going to discuss governance and how you can use Rencore to streamline some of the implementation of some of those opportunities that we see when it comes to Microsoft 365. So as everybody knows, Microsoft 365 is complex. It's complex in how people adopt and use it. And so, for instance, most organizations have profiles of users of Microsoft 365. So they have users that have E1s, they have users with E3s and E5s, they have frontline workers. And getting visibility into that data, which we've covered in other webinars, we're not going to go into that today, but getting visibility into the usage of the actual products and services in the different bundles is one of the keys to actually cost optimization. And so, when you get that information and you want to try and manage it, how do you do that? A lot of times we have discussions with people around, how do you profile users? How do I determine whether a user should be on an E3 or an F3, especially where the delineation isn't clear, you don't have the data. And so this becomes very important to understand how you can do this. And a big part of the challenge that organizations are having is poor governance and oversight, right? So a lot of the times what we see is we deployed Office 365, we put some thought into it, and then we just deployed. And where that really ends up impacting organizations, for instance, is, we had a client that just recently, they had deployed E5s to about 95% of their organization. They had a large number of frontline workers that could run F3s, but they didn't have the data to actually figure out, could we actually give those people that should qualify for F3s? What are they doing? What are they using? Are they using Office? Are they sending emails in Outlook? How big are their inboxes? All those sorts of things. And so because they didn't have that oversight, they just sort of assigned licenses, and then they didn't have governance. So what ended up happening was originally they went out and said, okay, these users should have frontline workers or frontline licenses, and then users could just go and request E5s. Or they didn't have a governance process around their onboarding process, so they just onboarded everybody with an E5. And sort of, down the road, 4 years later, they were spending about $2.5 million a year more than they needed to on E5s because they didn't have the governance and the visibility to actually manage those F3s in place. And so that's kind of how, this sort of manifests itself. And one of the things that we see quite often is these are the types of things that people are overpaying Microsoft for, right? So for instance, blocked users, right? A blocked user is somebody that's left the organization, no longer has access. Those licenses are still sitting there. Now, a lot of the times people will try and bring they'll leave them there for things like legal hold or archiving licenses for SharePoint or Exchange. They want to have access to their mailboxes or their team sites. There are better ways to be doing that, but they'll leave E3s and E5s on them. And if you take a look at your O365 spend, we on average see anywhere from 2 to 7% of licenses that are being consumed in the O365 status sitting in blocked users. And again, when we talk to people about how to get those back, a lot of the times they don't have the processes to actually go out and do that. They can see them sometimes. Sometimes they can see that they're there. Other times they can't, but they don't have a process to say, can we actually claim that? This user type needs to be, have legal hold or whatever it is. They just broad blanket it across the board and it ends up costing them 2 to 7% of their annual spend on E5. And so if you think about what your E5 spend is, this becomes fairly significant fairly quickly, right? We see often wrong license assignments, right? So this is just what I was talking about in terms of not having the data to make the decision whether a user should be an E5 or an F3, for instance. Maybe even users don't even need to be an E5, maybe they need to be an E1. And there's mismatches between this that are happening all the time. And so we're again, I'll give you another example here. Most organizations have consultants and outsourcers and things like that working within their organizations. Rarely do they have visibility into understanding what those users are actually accessing, right? And so when I have conversations with organizations, I kind of say, okay, look at staff augmentation, treat them as a user, look at your consultants as something different, right? Because if you're doing back office processing to an Accenture, Accenture has E5s or E3s for all their users, and then you go and buy E5s and E3s for all your users, right? And then you look at what those employees are doing or those Accenture, consultants are doing in your organization, and you realize they're not using Office, they're not doing those things. So this happens all the time. But again, it's very difficult, to understand that if you don't have the data. But even if you have the data, how do you manage that, right? Because Office 365 doesn't natively give you tooling that can actually help you make these things easier. And then another area that we see that is costing organizations, again, this one's in about the 3 to 5% range. So typically when we analyze somebody's O365 environment, 3 to 5% of their users are in an inactive user status. So what does this mean? This means that you have licenses allocated to employees that are not blocked. So usually when they leave, they get disabled and become blocked. These are inactive users. Now, sometimes inactive users could be people that are away on leave, right? Say maternity leave or something like that. Other times they're users in the organization that just don't use technology, right? So it's not uncommon for us to see, say in a healthcare environment, for instance, that you have people in the hospitals that never use the O365 technology. Maybe they have an identity for a badge to swipe in and swipe out, like say a janitor or maybe somebody working in the cafeteria, security guards, even nursing staff sometimes just do not use technology the way that Microsoft thinks. And so you see all these users that haven't touched the technology in 100, 300, 400 days. And again, it's very difficult for people to manage, right? So the conversation a lot of times we have around inactive users and being able to harvest those licenses are, we don't know which of these users are on maternity leave or on leave. And so if they're on leave, we don't want to remove their mailboxes and things like that and then have that become a problem. So again, it's a governance challenge for these organizations to be able to go and reclaim that. And if we look just at these three blocks, there's many others. I think Sam's going to touch on a couple of other things that are out there in out there that are challenging for organizations. These three things here typically average somewhere between 7 and 15% of your M365 spend. And so I often ask people, how would you like to get back 7 to 15%? Right. But then, the answer is, well, we don't have resources, we don't have time, we don't have the governance processes around that. Right. So there are a couple of other things that I'm going to touch on that are costing people money. We are seeing, for instance, people spending high six digits, if not seven digits, on incremental storage for SharePoint online. As they've deployed to Office 365, started using OneDrive, started using SharePoint, putting in policies that said no longer save files on your local hard drive. They're running out of the free storage that they get from Microsoft and having to buy additional storage. And they don't know what to do about that, right? They don't know how to archive it. They don't know how to proactively monitor it. And there are things that you can do again with some visibility to actually go and recoup those storage costs. Okay. We've talked a little bit already about over provisioning of E3. I put E3 licenses here, but this could be E5 licenses. But this one here is one that also there's a thing that organizations tend to do that just costs them money, right? And a lot of organizations like to have a buffer, right? So in other words, if I have 10,000 employees, I don't want to just have 10,000 E3s. I need a buffer because if we have to onboard new employees, I don't want to go through the process of going out and getting the, having to request the licenses and doing the reservations and all of those sorts of things. Well, if you're running a 5 to 10% buffer, that can be hundreds of thousands of dollars for large organizations. Even for smaller organizations, it can be tens of thousands of dollars, right? And again, it's just a governance thing. There's different ways that this can be done. Some of it maybe is, working with procurement on some of those practices, but there are things that you can do from a governance perspective here, right? And then I hit on this one as well, using e-licenses for legal hold. I don't know how many times we see thousands or hundreds of licenses in a tenant on those blocked users, and they're there for legal hold. And there's other things that you can do, right? Again, if you had a simple governance process where you could kind of say, this user's leaving, they're in legal hold, and then you automate the process of putting the right licenses on that and having all of that documented properly, you could actually save quite a substantial amount of money in most organizations here. So these 6 things are costing organizations substantial amount of money, and they really, try and address these things through a couple of things, right? So one of the things that they try and do is they try and use the Microsoft Admin Center for managing this. And the challenge there is the visibility into the admin center is very limited, and it's segmented. And what I mean by segmented is it segments by the product, right? So it segments SharePoint usage and Exchange usage and Teams usage and OneDrive usage. So it's a silo. And I can't see that usage across all of the users, or sorry, what one user is using across all of those silos very easily, right? So what most organizations are doing is they're building Power BI dashboards and trying to build advanced reporting. The other thing that managing it with the Microsoft Admin Console or the Admin Center or whatever you want to call it is that there is information that is not inside of there that most organizations need. Information out of, say, their SAP system or their PeopleSoft system so that they can get job codes and things like that, or location codes and all of those sorts of things. And again, so they're trying to stitch these things together in these Power BI reports, and they become very complex to manage. Now, if they can do them, they also become a single point of failure. We had one organization that built these PowerPoint dashboards. They were up and running. The person that built them and knew them left. There was no documentation. And in about 2 months, it just became a mess for them, right? So trying to build your own also has some challenges. They'll go out and try and get third-party solutions. Typically, these are in the SAM tool space, Flexera, Snow, CoreView. ServiceNow even says that they have some of these things. But the challenge with even the third party is they are typically read-only and giving you visibility. They're not building the governance piece and pushing back into the tenant. And so, and they're also limited in what they show. A lot of the times, they're only pulling the core information from the O365 tenant and then building that into reports. So they're not pulling the rich data that you need through the APIs and diving deep and things like that to really give you the visibility into the data that you need to make these sorts of decisions, right? And then the other thing that we see quite a bit is sort of along with Power BI dashboards is they're trying to use Power Automate or automation to automate these things. But they struggle with it because it's so complicated, and they just still don't have they still don't have real strong visibility, right? So for instance, if you're trying to automate inactive users where you say, okay, if a user goes inactive at 90 days, we're going to pull the licenses back because our assumption is they no longer need them. Well, how are you managing your exceptions, the leaves and things like that, right? So these are the challenges that our companies are seeing. This is how we're seeing them try and address them. And today, what we want to do is try and show you that there is another way that we believe to be much more efficient. And so, Sam, I'll turn it over to you.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Mike. And hi, everyone. It's great to be here. So I'm Sam. I'm from Source Code Control, and I'm the FinOps leader at Source Code. So just to give you a bit of an insight into who we are and what we do, I know Mike touched on it at the very beginning, but we're a consultancy with offices globally. So we're in the UK, we're in Poland, and we're in India, and we focus on open source and also cloud economics. So my role as a FinOps lead is working alongside partners like Metrics Data 360, and also customers directly to help them with their cloud and M365 optimization. So today I'm going to be building on the knowledge that Mike has just shared. I'll be speaking about the core elements for effective governance frameworks. We've got best practices, how this also relates to FinOps, because usually FinOps is more about cloud optimization, but there are learnings we can take to apply it to the M365 estate as well. And then also I'll be giving you a demonstration on the tool called Rencore, which allows you to take action on your M365 governance. So we'll be starting off just looking at that governance for M365 management. So governance plays a critical role in ensuring licenses are managed efficiently, also compliantly and cost effectively. So today we'll be focusing on 3 core areas, such as strategic policies, we've got defined roles and responsibilities, and also the power of automation. Are we able to move forward a couple, please, Mike? I think we've got, it's either forwards or backwards. Yeah, forwards a couple, please. Perfect. And on to the next one. This is the one. Brilliant. So yeah, first and foremost, we've got strategic policies. So these policies serve as a backbone to governance efforts. It sets clear guidelines for how licenses should be allocated, monitored, and eventually retired. And without solid policies, we open the door for confusion, inefficiencies, and also potential compliance risks. So what are the key aspects that we want to consider? Firstly, we've got license allocation. So we need to consider clear rules for assigning licenses based on roles, teams, and also actual needs. So for example, as Mike said earlier, you've got frontline staff. They actually might only need access to core tools, while analysts will need access to advanced functionalities. We've then got compliance requirements. So it's essential to stay on top of legal, regulatory, and also company standards. This includes guidelines like GDPR for data protection or industry-specific regulations. And then finally, we've got data provisioning, not data provisioning, deprovisioning. So this is establishing protocols for reclaiming licenses from inactive or departing users to help prevent waste and also keep our resources streamlined. So in short, well-defined policies gives us roadmaps for consistent, effective license management. Next up, we've got defined roles and responsibilities. That's the one. Ooh. Sorry, Mike, I think our slides are having a bit of fun today, aren't they?
Yeah, I'm scrolling and it's scrolling very far on me. So hold on, let me get back to where.
Well, I think we're a couple forwards. That's it. I've got the bottom of that one to go.
This one here. Gotcha.
Yeah, perfect. I think it's this one. Let me double check. Yes, that's the one. So next up, we've got, yeah, sorry, Mike, can you go back one actually? There we go. I've got the bottom of that bit to go. Defined roles and responsibilities. That's where I was up to. So here we need to make sure that a governance framework works best when people know exactly what's expected of them. So assigning roles avoids confusion and then helps ensure smooth operations. And at this stage, we can move to the next slide. Next slide, please. Thank you very much. Perfect. So we've got a breakdown here of the different roles that we can look at for this. So firstly, we've got IT teams. So these teams handle the technical side, like setting up licenses, assigning them appropriately, and keeping an eye on usage. We can also have a look at procurement teams. So their job is to manage purchases and renewals, ensuring that we're getting good value for money. And then we've also got finance teams. So finance tracks costs, flags budget overruns, and then ensures our spending essentially stays aligned with the company goals. And then finally, we've got governance champions. So these are a great implementation within an organization. And these individuals would help enforce policies within their departments, ensuring everyone follows the rules and escalating any concerns when needed. And then finally, with regards to effective governance framework, we've got the power of automation. So manual processes, as I'm sure we're all aware, can be time consuming and also error prone. But automation helps us simplify and streamline our license management tasks. So where does automation have the biggest impact? First of all, we've got provisioning. So this means that we could automatically assign licenses during the onboarding process based on some preset rules. We've also got deprovisioning, so you could use automated workflows to recover licenses from accounts that are no longer active. We've got policy enforcement, which is monitoring tools that can automatically detect and respond to policy violations, reducing the need for that manual oversight. And then finally, we've got usage analytics. So analytical tools can help provide insights on how licenses are being used, help us spot trends, and then optimize allocations. So to sum up this section, building a robust governance framework involves setting clear policies, defining roles and responsibilities, and then harnessing those automations to streamline the process. And when these elements work together, we get better visibility, improved compliance, and also greater cost efficiency. On that note, can we move to the next slide, please, Mike? Perfect. So now let's have a look at some practical strategies to strengthen our governance framework. We'll explore three key principles here: role-based access, audits and insights, and also ownership and accountability. And these practices can help us manage licenses effectively, maintain compliance, and avoid any unnecessary costs. So let's start with role-based access control. This practice ensures that individuals only have access to the licenses and features necessary for their job. RBAC helps us prevent overspending on premium licenses, for example, for someone that might have E5 when they should be on E3, and also reduces the risk of unauthorized access. So how do we implement this effectively? First up, we can look at defining user roles. We can begin by categorizing users into groups based on their responsibilities. Each group should then be mapped to specific license requirements to then avoid any guesswork. We could restrict high-cost features. So not everyone needs access to those advanced features. And by limiting these features to those who genuinely need them, we can then reduce the cost without impacting the productivity. And finally, we can use groups for efficiency. So assigning licenses at the group level in M365 as opposed to the user level helps us maintain consistency and then simplifies management. It also then stops the duplication of licenses, so that if you were to assign it via a group level and then again at a user level, you haven't given dual license assignment there. Now we've got audits and insights. So regular audits can help us track license usage, verify compliance with policies, and find opportunities to optimize. Now, without these checks, we could end up paying for licenses that we don't need, basically. So what can we do to make these audits more effective? We could start off by scheduling regular audits, whether we conduct reviews monthly, quarterly, whatever you feel is relevant for your organization, to help us catch these issues early. These audits help us spot inactive licenses, underutilized features, and also unusual usage patterns. We can use analytical tools, so tools like Rencore, which we'll be going into a bit more detail of in a moment. These can give you a clear view of license consumption and can highlight areas for improvement. These insights then help us make informed decisions so that any actions we take are based on data as opposed to any guesswork that we have. And finally, it's key to engage any stakeholders. So share the audit findings with IT, finance, or other business leaders so that you can get everyone on the same page and then ensuring the alignment of any corrective actions that you might need to take. And then finally, we've got ownership and accountability. So assigning clear ownership ensures that every aspect of license governance is properly managed, from procurement to usage monitoring. So a few examples of how we can reinforce ownership in our processes is to, firstly, we could look at cross-team collaboration. This involves IT, procurement, finance teams to cover all angles of license management. We can empower those governance champions that we mentioned a little bit earlier. So we can appoint champions in each department to promote the adherence to governance policies and identify any potential issues in a much earlier manner. And finally, we can escalate or establish escalation paths. So that would mean we're creating clear protocols for handling issues such as over licensing or urgent update requests so that problems can be resolved nice and quickly and efficiently. So just to conclude this slide, there are the three practices: RBAC, regular audits, and also ownership and accountability. These are fundamental for good governance. Implementing them early helps us stay compliant, avoid any unnecessary costs, and also ensures the right people have access to the right tools. All right, so moving on to FinOps now. FinOps will be our last topic before we give a demonstration of the tool. Now, I mentioned earlier, FinOps is traditionally known for its use or framework for cloud financial management. But its principles can also be applied to license management. So at its core, FinOps fosters collaboration across teams to manage costs more effectively and align resources within business goals. So how does FinOps then help us improve governance and compliance in license management? So first and foremost, it helps us promote transparency. FinOps gives us a clear visibility into license usage and costs, making this information accessible across teams so that everyone can see how resources are being used and where inefficiencies might exist. It also encourages accountability. So a key FinOps principle is to assign ownership to specific roles and departments. So this ensures that individuals understand their responsibility when it comes to managing licenses. It also helps us ensure compliance. So continuous monitoring helps us track against company policies and regulatory requirements. And this proactive approach then allows us to address potential issues before they become a bigger problem. And finally, it reduces non-compliance risks. So by identifying licenses that are unused or over-allocated or perhaps even misallocated, in real time, we can take swift action to then correct these discrepancies. So ultimately, FinOps helps us maintain control, avoid any unnecessary costs, and supports compliance across the organization. All right, so I'm going to move on to a demonstration now of Rencore itself. So I'm going to steal the screen sharing from Mike. Let me just make sure my dashboard is still loaded up. There we go. And we're going to share the screen. Hopefully that's visible to everybody. Perfect. I've got the thumbs up from Mike. That's good news. So just to give you a bit of an insight into Rencore before I go through the demo itself. So Rencore is a governance cloud collaboration tool that helps organizations establish compliance policies then tailored to their needs so they can stay informed about violations. It connects to a wide range of M365 services such as Microsoft Teams, we've got SharePoint, OneDrive, Entra ID, Exchange, and many more. So it then provides a comprehensive inventory of these elements within minutes. The platform also offers over 100 fully customizable policy templates built in from best practices, and then that allows organizations to monitor and manage their security posture, service adoption, platform costs, and operations effectively. So in summary, Rencore helps companies with governance and compliance by providing tools that simplify and automate the management of their M365 environments, ensuring that they can collaborate efficiently and also securely while adhering to organizational policies and regulatory requirements. Now, Mike touched on earlier about reasons why we might want to be looking at governance or how we can use tools and use cases. And a couple of use cases that we can use Rencore for are things like storage optimization. So if you're an organization that has OneDrive or SharePoint and you're finding that your storage is just continuously growing, your costs keep increasing, we can use tools like Rencore to identify any redundant storage or age storage that maybe we can remove. We could move it to blob storage if you need to keep a hold of that data, or you can delete it altogether. We could look at license management and cost optimization. So that's identifying if we've got users that have left the organization, but perhaps they've still got licenses assigned to them, or equally, we might have licenses assigned to user, but they're not using them. So this is all wasted money, effectively, that we can remove and recoup. We could look at decluttering for things like Teams, SharePoint, OneDrive, and Power Automate. We can look at collaboration security and also multi-factor authentication, and also data retention and lifecycle management. Now, a key benefit of this tool itself is that it's a right tool. So you can do all your management from one place. I'll show you in a moment where actually that comes in really handy. And it's something that Rencore are really proud of, in that you can effectively use their platform as a one-stop shop to do all your automation and management. So you're not finding the data and the insights in the tool and then having to go to your Office 365 platform, for instance, to actually do those automations. So let's have a deep dive then into the platform itself. Now, the screen you can see is the initial dashboard. You can see here that we've got overviews into security, we've got access, we've got compliance, we've got decluttering, different violations within the organization. So there's a lot that we can see on this initial dashboard. This is actually fully customizable. And also you can come in here and click on anything that you want to find out more about. So for instance, here we can see that we've got 384 violations of over licensed user accounts. So effectively, they've got licenses that are giving them the same functionality, so we can make some of those licenses redundant. So we could, if we wanted to, click through here and it would take us to find more about those violations. So as I mentioned, you can edit these dashboards to give you more visibility on anything that's key to you. So simply come up here, you can edit the dashboard, even if it's just moving it around to make it prettier for you, or equally you can add in additional elements that you might be interested in. In addition to that, if you wanted to, you can create your own dashboard from scratch. So we could come up here, you can either use a template from any below, or we can create a blank dashboard. So let's say that you're interested in SharePoint and OneDrive. We can click that, add some new titles, and then if we search in here, you can see I've done this before. We've got SharePoint here, and you can simply add in any interesting dashboards that might be relevant for you. This could also be great for if you've got multiple users utilizing the Rencore dashboard, then they can come in and make customizable ones that are relevant to their role and responsibilities. As we mentioned, FinOps is all about assigning different roles and responsibilities to each user so they can stay on top of that compliance. So just for example's sake, I'm just going to add all of these in. And then we can go down and see. Now we can see that dashboard here, and we can engage with that data effectively. Now, equally, if we go back to the dashboards, there are lots that are pre-configured. If we drop down here, you can see you've got ones around security, decluttering, costs. So if you've got any specific use cases, which I touched on earlier, you can create a dashboard specifically for that. And you can see the new one that I created here. In addition to that, you might have a large organization that's got offices in different geographical locations. You might have different departments that are very separate from one another, but you can actually then create different workspaces specifically for those. So if you've got different people within the organization that are going to be looking after the US or Germany, then you can simply set up those different workspaces so they only have visibility to the data that's relevant for them. Okay, so let's move on to some of the more exciting data. So first up, we've got reports. Now, this is where you can create queries. We can query the data, and then it will give you outputs based on that query. So for example, let's say we want to have a look at licenses assigned to inactive users. This is going to be a key activity that you want to do for cost management. So we can simply click up here. We can see the different licenses that have been assigned, and we can see how many of those licenses have been assigned. As we scroll down then, we can look at, again, those licenses. And if we wanted to, we can see who actually has those specific licenses. So if I'm going to drop down here, you can see the Office 365 E5 licenses have been assigned to all of these users. Now you can see this section here says account enabled. So essentially, are they an active account? We've got multiple ones here that are false. So we've now got wasted licenses because they're assigned to an inactive user. Now, going back to the point I made earlier with regards to Rencore being a write tool, you could actually come into here and then take actions on that user. So for instance, we could delete the user account. You could remove that license from the user. You can see here there are loads of different actions you can take with regards to that. Now, with great power comes great responsibility. So, of course, you need to make sure that anyone that has access to this or any policies you're putting into place have been pre-arranged within the organization so that we aren't accidentally deleting any users or unassigning any licenses. So that's the power of reports. And of course, in all of these sections, you can then create your own reports. The ones down here are pre-created by Rencore as you move in, but you can add your own if there's something specific you're wanting to look into. So next up, we've got inventory, and the clue's kind of within the name of this one. This is just giving us a summary of all of the different elements within our environment. So we can see all of the different users, we can assess sensitivity labels. Sensitivity labels is a really interesting one for those of you that are wanting to use Copilot. Now, Copilot obviously is able to give responses based on the data it has access to. So if you don't have sensitivity labels set up within the organization, effectively Copilot can use any of the data within SharePoint or OneDrive that it has access to give responses. So by setting up sensitivity labels, you can restrict that access for Copilot. So it's not leaking any potential sensitive or confidential information or also any old information. So that could be a use case as to why you might want to look at sensitivity labels. We can also look at the inventory for Teams, Power Automate, Power Apps. Let's have a look into Teams, for instance. If we click on this, we can then see all of the different teams that are set up within the organizations. Policies that we'll go into in a moment. When you've assigned a policy to Teams, for instance, we can then see all of those that are related up here. And this is any violations for those policies. You can simply come in and take actions on those. Let's say we want to have a look at a specific team. We can click on that team in here. We can understand the different properties. We can see how many policies have been passed. And if we go over into compliance, we can actually then see which of those policies it's not passed. So that's going to give us some corrective action to take moving forwards. And like with all of the other dashboards, if you wanted to, you can come in here and add your own segment if you want to add to the inventory. Next up, we've got compliance. Now, arguably, this is probably one of the most key elements of the tool. This is going to allow us to see different policies and also set different policies. All of the policies you can see down here are created by automatically come with the Rencore deployment. You can simply switch on or off those different policies, and that is going to be key when setting up the tool. You want to make sure that any of these policies that we have are necessary so that we're not taking any actions that perhaps aren't wanted by the organization. So let's have a look, for instance, here, a policy of externally shared files. Whether you have a policy that you can't share files externally or you just want to keep a track of those files that are shared, you can come into here and it's going to give you a list of every single file that has been shared from SharePoint outside of the organization. Now, the data you're looking at here is demo data, but here you can see who it was shared by. You can see what the item was that was shared, and then you can take actions on that as well. So let's say we wanted to remove that document from sharing. Let's say it was accidentally shared externally, or you only want to share it externally for 30 days, we can come in and take remediative action on that. Okay. If you also wanted to, you can come up here, and at the moment we're viewing it for the last 30 days, but you can change that time period too. So let's say you're doing an initial inventory of this when you first set up Rencore, you might want to go back to the last year, for instance, to see if there's anything shared there. Equally, you can export this data. So you can either export the data as the columns you can see, or you can export it as all of the background data as well, as either an Excel or a PDF. When you click export, you're then sent an email with that file that you can then download. And if we go back, as you can see here, we can then add our own policy in. Either you can use a template for a policy that's been created, or you can create your own custom policy. So for example, we want to have a look at any admins that don't have multi-factor authentication. If we use this template, you can see how that policy is set up. And you'll be able to see actually how many different ways you could set up a policy in the future if you wanted to. And then finally, I'm just going to move on to automation. So this is where you can set up automations to keep your environment compliant. Again, you can see a list here of all these pre-configured automations that have been created, and you can come in and create your own one by simply coming up here. Again, you've got templates of ones that you can create, or you can create your own one from scratch. Just to give you an example of one, let's have a look at keeping on the theme of externally shared files. Let's come down here to remind OneDrive owners of externally shared files. You might want to set it up so that every 30 days, if a file has been shared, you remind the owner that it's been shared externally, and that can keep a track on whether they want to turn it on, off, or delete the file itself. So we can see here every item in here of where that automation has been sent, whether the automation was completed or it failed. And just to show you how these are set up, we can edit the automation. You can see here it's a process flow. So what trigger do we want? This is relating to file sharings. You can then set it up so that it will send an email to the owner of the file that's been shared to remind them that that OneDrive file has been shared, so they need to check if it's still necessary. That's just one small example of how you could set up automations. In addition to this, you can, going back to the report section, you can send those reports automatically as well. Let's say every week, every 30 days, you want a report to be shared with the relevant user. That can be set up as well. So I'm going to finish there with the demonstration. I appreciate I've gone through a lot very quickly, and there really is so much more to dive into with Rencore, but I just want to keep this as a high-level summary to give you a taste of what can be done. So with that, I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and I'm going to hand back over to Mike.
So just give me a second to share my screen again. Oh. So I think we did the demo, and then I haven't seen any questions, but if anybody does have any questions, feel free to drop them in the um, chat, and Sam and I will do our best to answer any that you may have. Sam, I did have just a couple of quick questions. So if we take a look at some of those challenges that organizations are having that I started out with, like for instance, SharePoint storage. So is it correct that you could set a policy then within Remcore to say, if a SharePoint site hasn't been accessed in X number of days, run through a workflow that eventually maybe gets that SharePoint either archived or deleted so that they can start sharing on storage?
Exactly that, yes. Automations are kind of endless with this tool. So exactly like you said, you could set one up that removes that SharePoint site. You can also do the same for users. If a user hasn't been active in 180 days, you could remove the license and then remove the user. So you can really use it as a cleanup exercise as frequently as you want.
Okay. And is it the same sort of thing then with users that you can sort of say, can you make a group? So for instance, we know these people are on leave, so don't touch them. But if anybody else pops in, run through a workflow, which could potentially include I might be putting you on the spot, but you get, because the one thing that we get asked all the time is how do we know if they're actually truly inactive, right? If they're on leave, we don't want to delete them, right? And so this is where that danger comes in, right? So
For
just curious
sure,
of
for
how
sure. And I
Rencore
think
addresses that.
that's where an element of you can use the tool to identify who's inactive, but maybe there's probably an element of internal evaluation that needs to go on as well, just to check what's going on within the organization. In terms of being able to put users into a group and then get alerts when a new user comes into that, I don't know if specifically that scenario can be done, but you could set it up so that every week or every month you are sent a report that identifies inactive users, so you could monitor it that way.
Excellent. Okay, perfect. So don't see any questions there. So we must have done an awesome job of presenting today. So I just wanted to say thank you for everybody for joining us today. If you do have any questions, as usual, please feel free to reach out. We'll be happy to, have a deeper discussion on how Rencore can help you accomplish some of those savings that we've probably identified in our engagements with some of our clients that I see on here, or if you're not new to this whole sort of optimization of Microsoft 365, we can help you identify where these opportunities are, and then work with source code to put something like Rencore in place so that you can automate that whole process end to end. So thank you, everyone.
Thank you.